The old pickup truck hummed a happy tune as it pulled away from Ethan's house. Ethan, with his bright red backpack squeezed onto his lap, practically bounced in his seat. "This is going to be the best trip ever, Marcus," he exclaimed, a wide smile lighting up his face. His best friend, Marcus, sat behind the wheel. Marcus was a quiet guy, usually keeping his feelings tucked away like treasures. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Yeah, Ethan," he mumbled, but his voice was soft, like a whisper in the wind. Ethan glanced at him, a tiny worry starting to buzz in his head. Marcus wasn't usually so quiet. He looked a little sad, actually, as if a gray cloud was sitting right over his head. Ethan had planned this road trip for months, dreaming of new sights and funny stories they'd share. They were heading north to a big lake where they used to go fishing as kids. Ethan had imagined them singing along to loud music and laughing until their bellies hurt. But right now, the only sound was the truck's steady rumble and the quiet hum of Marcus's thoughts. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked gently, turning more fully toward his friend. "You seem a little far away." Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I'm fine, Ethan," he said, his voice a bit stiff. He didn't look at Ethan, just kept his gaze fixed on the endless ribbon of highway stretching out before them. The sun was warm, shining bright on this perfect morning, but a coolness seemed to hang in the air inside the truck. Ethan decided to try and cheer him up. He pulled out a bag of gummy bears and offered one to Marcus, hoping a little sweetness might help. Marcus just shook his head, a small frown on his face. This was going to be a long trip, indeed. The miles rolled by, painted with green trees and big, open fields. Ethan tried his best to keep the mood light. He told silly jokes and pointed out interesting things they passed, like a cow wearing a funny hat or a house shaped like a giant boot. Marcus would sometimes give a small chuckle, a sound like dry leaves rustling, but it never lasted long. Most of the time, he just stared straight ahead, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his face as still as a stone. Ethan turned up the radio, hoping some upbeat music would help. A catchy pop song filled the truck, and Ethan sang along a little off-key, but with a lot of heart. Marcus just tapped his fingers on the wheel, not quite to the beat. It felt like Marcus was miles away, even though he was right beside Ethan. It was like trying to talk to someone through a thick pane of glass. Ethan could see him, but he couldn't quite reach him. "Remember that time we went camping by the lake, and a squirrel stole all our marshmallows?" Ethan asked, trying another happy memory. "You chased it all over the campsite with a stick." A tiny smile flickered on Marcus's lips, then vanished. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft again. "That was a long time ago." The conversation often dried up like a puddle in the sun. Ethan would ask a question, and Marcus would give a short answer. It was like pulling teeth, trying to get him to talk more. Ethan started to feel a little tired from trying so hard. He leaned his head against the window, watching the world outside rush by. The bright morning had slowly turned into a warm afternoon, but Marcus's quiet sadness still filled the truck. It made the long road feel even longer. Ethan wondered what Marcus was thinking, what made him so quiet and distant on a trip they had planned for so long. The silence grew heavier with each passing mile. The quiet hum of the truck and the long stretches of silence had almost lulled Ethan to sleep. He'd given up on trying to pull Marcus out of his shell for a while, letting his own thoughts drift with the passing scenery. But then something caught his eye. Far off in the distance, where the blue sky usually met the green fields, a dark smudge was growing. It wasn't just a regular cloud. It was huge and angry-looking, like a bruise spreading across the horizon. Ethan sat up straighter. "Hey, Marcus," he said, pointing. "Look at that cloud. Looks like we're in for some weather." Marcus finally shifted his gaze from the road, his eyes following Ethan's finger. A small line appeared between his eyebrows. The smudge quickly grew into a towering wall of dark gray, then almost black. It was moving fast, swallowing the bright blue sky bit by bit. The sunlight that had warmed the truck all day started to fade, replaced by a strange, greenish light that made the trees look spooky. The air grew heavy and still, as if the world was holding its breath. The leaves on the trees stopped rustling. Even the birds seemed to go quiet. The once clear road ahead now looked dim and shadowy under the approaching darkness. The cheerful pop music on the radio suddenly felt out of place, so Ethan reached over and turned it down. A shiver ran down his spine, not just from the sudden chill in the air, but from the sight of that scary cloud. It was like a giant monster creeping up on them, ready to gobble up the sunny afternoon. Marcus's quiet mood now seemed to fit the darkening sky, making the inside of the truck feel even smaller. This wasn't just a rain shower. This looked like a real storm. The monster cloud didn't just loom, it swallowed them whole. One moment, they were driving under a strange green sky, and the next, the world turned gray. A sudden gust of wind slammed into the truck, making it wobble on the road. Ethan gasped as the first fat drops of rain splattered against the windshield, sounding like stones hitting glass. Then, as if a giant bucket had been tipped over, the heavens opened up. Rain hammered down, not just falling but crashing against the truck. It came in sheets, so thick and fast that the wipers, even on their fastest setting, couldn't keep up. The road ahead disappeared in a watery blur. It was like driving inside a waterfall. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his knuckles white. His face was set, a mix of worry and fierce concentration. The truck slowed down, fighting against the water and the wind. The wind howled now, a deep, angry sound that whistled around the windows and shook the whole vehicle. Trees on the side of the road bent and swayed like dancers in a wild storm. Leaves and small branches flew past the windshield, carried by the strong gusts. Ethan felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He couldn't see anything beyond a few feet in front of them, just a gray, watery wall. The once familiar world outside was gone, hidden by the storm's fury. It was loud, too. The drumming of the rain on the roof and the roar of the wind were so strong that Ethan had to lean closer to Marcus just to be heard. This wasn't just bad weather. It was a furious, raging beast. The truck was already fighting against the angry storm, its wipers swishing hard, the engine groaning. Ethan was peering through the blurry windshield, trying to make out anything ahead, when a new, terrible sound joined the storm's roar. Thump, 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 thump. It was a heavy, uneven beat coming from underneath them. Then the whole truck lurched violently to one side, like a tired dog tripping over its own feet. What was that? Ethan yelled over the noise, his heart jumping into his throat. He grabbed onto the dashboard as the truck shook and pulled to the right. Marcus's face, already tight with worry, turned even paler. He wrestled with the steering wheel, trying to keep the truck straight. The thump, thump, thump got louder, more urgent, like a drum beating a warning. The truck was no longer moving smoothly. It felt like it was dragging something heavy. A bad feeling settled in Ethan's stomach. I think it's a flat, Marcus shouted back, his voice strained. He didn't need to say more. The way the truck was bumping and shaking, the way it was pulling to the side, it was clear. A flat tire. In this storm, on this dark, lonely road. Just as the realization hit them, a flash of lightning split the black sky outside, making the inside of the truck bright for a quick second. The thunder that followed was a booming clap right over their heads, making the truck shudder. The flat tire was bad enough, but happening right now, in the middle of this wild storm, felt like the worst kind of joke. They were stuck. With a groan, Marcus fought the steering wheel, slowly guiding the wobbling truck to the very edge of the road. The tires crunched on gravel as they finally came to a stop, the engine sighing. Outside, the storm raged just as fiercely, the rain still drumming a furious rhythm on the roof. Ethan looked out the window, trying to see where they were, but there was nothing to see. The darkness was thick and heavy, like a velvet blanket thrown over everything. The truck's headlights cut through the pouring rain, making two weak, blurry tunnels of light. Beyond those, it was just black. No streetlights, no glow from distant houses, no red tail lights of other cars passing by. Nothing. It felt like they had driven into a big, empty space far away from the rest of the world. The only things they could make out were the tall, shadowy shapes of trees, bending and swaying like ghosts in the wind. Ethan felt a prickle of unease. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice a little small. Marcus shook his head, his shoulders slumping a little. "I don't know this road," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "We must have taken a wrong turn somewhere back there. Try to avoid the worst of the rain." The realization settled over them like a cold, wet cloth. They weren't just stuck, they were lost, in the middle of nowhere with a flat tire and a raging storm. The isolation was suddenly very real, a heavy weight in the small space of the truck. There was no one to see them, no one to hear them, just the endless rain and the dark, lonely road stretching out into nothing. Ethan fumbled for his phone, the familiar weight a small comfort in the chaos. "I'll call for help," he said, trying to sound brave, though his voice shook a little. He knew they couldn't fix a tire in this downpour, not with the wind trying to rip the doors off. He pressed the power button, and the screen lit up, a small square of blue in the dark truck. But then his heart sank. In the top corner, where the little signal bars should have been, there was only a tiny X. "No service," he whispered, the words feeling heavy and final. He tried again, opening his contacts, but the phone just told him, "Emergency calls only." Even those wouldn't go through if there wasn't a signal. He shook the phone, as if that would magically bring the signal back, but it stayed stubbornly blank. Marcus, who had been trying his own phone, let out a frustrated sigh. "Mine too," he said, dropping his phone onto the dashboard. It landed with a soft thump, another useless piece of plastic. Nothing, just a big fat zero. The realization hit them both at the same time, like another clap of thunder. Not only were they lost and stuck in a storm with a flat tire, but they couldn't even tell anyone where they were. They were truly on their own. The roar of the rain outside seemed to press in on them, making the small space of the truck feel even smaller, even more cut off. It was just them, surrounded by the wild storm, with no way to reach the outside world. The feeling of being completely alone, with no help coming, was a cold, sharp claw in Ethan's chest. The disappointment of no cell service was quickly swallowed by the rising fury of the storm. The rain, which had already been loud, decided to get even louder. It wasn't just drops anymore. It was a solid sheet of water pounding on the truck's roof. It sounded like 1,000 tiny drummers, all beating their drums as hard as they could, making a wild, roaring song. The sound vibrated through the metal of the truck, making their teeth feel a little fuzzy. Ethan looked at Marcus, then back at the window, where the outside world was just a watery blur. "We can't even try to change the tire, can we?" he yelled, trying to make his voice heard over the noise. Marcus shook his head, a grim look on his face. "No way," he shouted back, his voice rough. "We'd be soaked in 2 seconds, and it's too dark to see anything anyway." He was right. Stepping out into that mess would be like jumping into a raging river. The wind would rip an umbrella from their hands, and the rain would sting their eyes. They were trapped inside the cab, with no choice but to wait. The loud, constant drumming of the rain filled every corner of the truck. It drowned out all other sounds, making it impossible to hear anything from outside. It was like being in a small, metal box at the bottom of a giant waterfall. The world beyond the windows had vanished, erased by the storm's powerful sound. This strange, booming quietness meant only one thing. They were stuck here, together, listening to the rain. It was a strange kind of privacy, forced upon them by the storm's wild power. The deafening drum of the rain continued, making conversation impossible without shouting. Ethan leaned back against the seat, trying to find some comfort in the shaking truck. He stole a glance at Marcus. Marcus was usually so steady, so calm, even when things were tough. But now his face was pale, his eyes wide and darting around the small space. He wasn't just worried about the storm or the flat tire. There was something else, something deeper, twisting his features. His hands, still gripping the steering wheel, were trembling slightly. He kept shifting in his seat, as if the truck's cab had suddenly become too small for him. He wouldn't meet Ethan's eyes, instead looking at the dashboard, then the rain-streaked window, then his own knees. It was a nervous energy, like a trapped bird fluttering its wings. Ethan had seen Marcus scare before, like when they almost crashed their bikes as kids, but this was different. This wasn't the fear of a moment. It was a deep, uncomfortable feeling that seemed to be bubbling up from inside him. It was a fear that mixed with something else, something that made his face look tight and his brow furrowed, as if he was trying to solve a very hard puzzle. The isolation, the darkness, the pounding rain, all of it seemed to be working on Marcus, peeling away the calm mask he usually wore. Ethan watched him, a new kind of worry starting to grow in his own chest. This wasn't just about the storm anymore. Something was really bothering Marcus, and it was clear it had nothing to do with the weather. The rain kept up its furious assault, a solid wall of sound that sealed them off from the rest of the world. It was like they were inside a giant drum, and the storm was playing a wild, never-ending solo. Ethan couldn't hear the wind anymore, just the constant, heavy drumming on the roof and windows. It wasn't just loud. It was all-consuming, a sound that filled his ears and pushed everything else away. This overwhelming sound did something strange. It made the truck feel like a tiny, hidden cave. No one could possibly hear them out here. The roar of the storm was a thick, wet blanket covering their little space, making it utterly private. Whatever they said, whatever thoughts they shared, would stay right there, swallowed by the rain. It was a strange kind of quiet, even though it was so loud. Ethan looked at Marcus again. Marcus still looked jumpy, his eyes avoiding Ethan's. But now, in the strange, secret bubble of the truck, Ethan felt a shift. The storm's noise was so strong. It was almost like it was forcing them to be honest, to let their real feelings come out. There was no escape, no distraction, just the two of them and the roaring rain. It felt like the perfect place for a secret, a place where words could be spoken that would never reach anyone else's ears. The air inside the truck grew heavy with this quiet understanding, even as the storm raged outside. It was a secret place just for them. The loud rhythm of the rain filled the truck, a steady, powerful sound that felt like it was scrubbing away the outside world. Marcus sat stiffly beside Ethan, his hands still on the steering wheel, but now they weren't just gripping. They were kneading the leather, as if trying to squeeze something out. Ethan watched him, the heavy silence between them, apart from the rain, becoming almost too much to bear. Then Marcus took a breath. It wasn't a small breath or a quick one. It was a big, deep breath like someone getting ready to dive in a very cold water. His chest rose, then slowly fell. He finally turned his head, just a little, to look at Ethan. His eyes were still wide, but now they held a mix of fear and something else Ethan couldn't quite name. It was like a dam was about to break. "Ethan," Marcus started, his voice a little rough, like stones tumbling over each other. He had to speak louder than normal to be heard over the drumming rain, and his words felt big and important in the small space. "There's something I need to tell you." He paused, taking another shaky breath. His gaze flickered away for a moment, out to the blurry, watery world, then back to Ethan's face. "It's a big secret," he continued, his voice a little stronger this time, but still full of a heavy feeling. "Something I've been carrying for a long time, right here." He tapped his chest lightly, right over his heart. The way he said it, with the loud rain as their only witness, made Ethan's own heart beat a little faster. He knew, somehow, that whatever Marcus was about to say would change everything. The privacy of the storm had finally cracked Marcus's wall. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes still fixed on Ethan's face. The rain roared outside, a fierce curtain of sound that made his next words feel even more powerful. "This trip," he began, his voice a little shaky, I almost didn't come." Ethan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He remembered Marcus being a bit distant, but to almost cancel the trip? That was a shock. He waited, not saying anything, just letting Marcus find his words. Marcus took another breath, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were now twisting together. "It's because of you, Ethan," he confessed, his voice barely rising above the storm's din, "because of being so close to you." He looked up again, a desperate honesty in his eyes. "I knew this would happen," he continued, his words tumbling out faster now, as if a dam had truly broken. "Being stuck in a truck with you for days. It would make it impossible to hide." He paused, searching for the right words, his brow furrowed with a deep confusion. "My feelings, they're all mixed up. Confusing. Ethan felt a jolt go through him. Marcus's sadness, his quietness, his discomfort, it all clicked into place, but in a way Ethan had never expected. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw, pushed close by the pressing sound of the rain. Marcus was worried about his feelings for Ethan, feelings that being so close had brought to the surface. It was a truth Ethan hadn't dared to imagine, whispered in the middle of a raging storm, a secret meant only for their ears. Ethan sat very still, listening to Marcus's words, his mind trying to catch up. The rain outside was a loud, constant hum, making Marcus's voice feel close and very real. Confusing how? Ethan asked, his voice soft, almost swallowed by the storm. Marcus finally let go of the steering wheel, his hands falling to his lap, where they clenched into fists. He looked at Ethan, his eyes wide and a little lost. I've been thinking about you, he started, his voice barely a whisper against the roar of the rain. Not just as my best friend, but in other ways. Ways that surprised me. He shook his head slowly, a deep frown on his face. It doesn't make sense to me, Ethan. I don't understand it. It's like a puzzle with all the pieces mixed up. He looked down at his hands, then back up, a raw honesty in his gaze. I see you, and it's not just the same old Ethan. It's different, and it scares me because I don't know what these feelings mean. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Marcus, always so sure of himself, was admitting he was lost. Ethan felt a strange mix of shock and a gentle ache in his chest. To hear Marcus, his straight, reserved best friend, say he was thinking of Ethan in other ways was a huge thing. The storm's loud drumming somehow made the confession feel even more private, like a secret shared in a hidden room. Ethan could feel Marcus's confusion, his fear, and a brave effort it took to speak these words aloud. The truck, usually just a way to get from one place to another, had become a tiny world where big, surprising truths were finally coming out. Ethan didn't say anything, didn't move. He just looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time since they'd left. He listened with every part of him. The loud, drumming rain outside was still raging, but instead of making it hard to hear, it did something magic. It pushed away all the little noises, all the everyday thoughts, making a clear space inside the truck. In that strange, loud quiet, Marcus's words stood out, each one ringing clear and strong. He heard the tremble in Marcus's voice, the raw honesty in his eyes. He heard the surprise, the fear, and the deep confusion. Every word about other ways and mixed-up feelings landed in Ethan's heart, not soft and fuzzy, but sharp and real. It was like the rain was scrubbing away everything extra, leaving only the important truth behind. Ethan felt Marcus's bravery in that tiny space, a bravery made even bigger because of the wild storm outside. Ethan kept his eyes on Marcus, letting him speak, letting him pour out all the heavy feelings he'd been hiding. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. The loud, chaotic sound of the rain was like a big, soft blanket wrapping around them, making their conversation deeply private. No one could ever know what was being said in this small truck, trapped in the middle of nowhere. It was just Ethan and Marcus and the powerful, roaring secret of the storm. In that moment, listening was the only thing Ethan could do, and it felt like the most important thing he had ever done. As Marcus finished speaking, the loud rain kept on, a steady roar that filled the small truck. Ethan felt a mix of feelings swirl inside him, like leaves caught in a strong wind. First, there was a big surprise, a jolt that went right through him. Marcus? His quiet, straight best friend? Thinking about him in those ways? It was something Ethan had never, ever imagined. Then a little fear crept in. Not a scary, jump-out-of-your-skin fear, but a soft, worried kind of fear. What did this mean for their friendship? What did it mean for them? Everything felt different now, like the ground had shifted under their feet. It was a new, unknown path, and that was a little scary. But with the surprise and the fear came something else, something strong and warm. Ethan looked at Marcus, really saw the struggle and the bravery in his eyes, and he felt a deep understanding. He knew how hard it must have been for Marcus to say those words, especially Marcus, who kept everything locked up tight. To share such a big, confusing secret in the middle of a wild storm, with no way out, that took real courage. Ethan felt a surge of respect and a tender ache in his heart for his friend. Marcus wasn't just talking about feelings. He was being honest in a way Ethan had rarely seen from him. And in the dark, noisy truck, with the storm hiding them from the whole world, that honesty felt like a bright, shining light. Ethan might have been surprised and a little scared, but he also knew, with all his heart, that Marcus's brave truth was a gift. The last of Marcus's words faded, swallowed by the drumming rain, and a heavy silence fell between them. It wasn't an empty silence, but one thick with unspoken thoughts and feelings. They just sat there, side by side, as the rain continued its furious beat on the truck's roof. Ethan looked at Marcus, who had turned his gaze back to the blurry windshield. Marcus's face was still pale, but some of the tight fear had eased, replaced by a deep thoughtfulness. It was as if speaking his secret had lifted a heavy weight, even if he didn't know what would happen next. Ethan could almost feel the gears turning in Marcus's mind, trying to make sense of the new, surprising world his words had created. And Ethan himself was thinking, too. His mind was a jumble of what Marcus had said, what it meant, and what he felt back. It was all so sudden, so unexpected. The steady roar of the rain was like a big, loud clock, ticking away the seconds while they both tried to catch their breath. They were in a small, metal bubble, cut off from everything, forced to face these big, new feelings. The storm outside wasn't just a storm anymore. It was a powerful helper, making this quiet moment possible, letting them both truly feel what had just happened. The air in the truck was thick with new possibilities and the heavy weight of shared secrets. Slowly, like a big animal getting tired, the storm began to lose its angry roar. The drumming rain on the truck's roof softened from a furious crash to a steady patter. The violent wind quieted to a sigh. Ethan could finally hear the faint drip, drip, drip from the edges of the roof, and the gentle rustle of leaves on the nearby trees. The scary, solid wall of sound that had surrounded them started to break apart, letting in the fainter sounds of the world. But even as the storm outside grew calmer, the air inside the truck still felt thick and heavy. It wasn't with rain, but with big, important feelings. Marcus still sat very still, staring ahead, his secret now out in the open. Ethan could feel the weight of Marcus's words, the surprise and the new understanding still swirling inside him. The quietness of the rain meant they could speak normally again, but neither of them did. The words that had just been shared were too big, too new, to rush into another conversation. The truck was no longer a secret bubble, completely cut off. The dim outside world was slowly becoming visible again through the clearing windshield. But the inside world, the space between Ethan and Marcus, was changed forever. It was filled with unspoken questions, with brave honesty, and with the tender, uncertain beginnings of something new. The storm might have been quieting, but the real storm, the one inside Marcus's heart, and now Ethan's too, was just beginning to find its way. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, no longer a furious roar, but a quiet, steady rhythm. The world outside was slowly coming back into view, though it was still dark and wet. The heavy silence in the truck finally felt like it could be broken. Marcus cleared his throat, a small, rough sound. He looked at Ethan, a hint of shyness in his eyes. We should try to fix that tire," he said, his voice a little quiet. It wasn't a command, but an offering, a way to move forward. Ethan nodded, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "Yeah," he agreed, his voice soft. "We should." He reached for the truck door handle, but then he paused, looking back at Marcus. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance, something new passed between them. It wasn't just the old friendship, easy and comfortable. It was deeper, richer, touched by the brave words Marcus had spoken in the heart of the storm. They were still friends, yes, but now there was a new understanding, a quiet promise of something more, something unknown but deeply felt. They would tackle the flat tire not just as two guys stuck on a road, but as two people who had just shared a profound secret, who had looked into each other's hearts and found something surprising. They would work together, not just to get the truck moving, but to navigate this new, tender path their friendship was on. The task ahead was still tough, but doing it together with this new connection felt different. It felt like a beginning. Just as they opened their doors, ready to face the wet world and the flat tire, something amazing happened. The last drips of rain fell, making soft plinks on the truck. Then, as if a giant hand had wiped away the dark clouds, a small patch of sky appeared in the distance. It wasn't the bright blue of morning, but a soft, pale gray, with a sliver of light pushing through. It was like a shy smile after a long cry. The darkness that had covered everything began to lift, slowly, gently. The shadowy trees gained clearer shapes, and the wet road shimmered faintly under the hint of returning light. It wasn't sunrise yet, but it was a promise that the night was ending, that the storm was truly over. Ethan looked at that small light in the sky, then at Marcus, who was also watching it. Marcus's face, no longer pale with fear, held a look of quiet wonder. The light wasn't just showing them the wet road ahead. It was showing them a path forward in a deeper way. They might not know what came next for them, or how to untangle the surprising new feelings that had been spoken. But as they stepped out of the truck into the fresh, damp air, with that small light growing brighter, they knew one thing. They would face it together. The old road trip had ended with a storm and a secret, but a new journey was just beginning, full of honesty and the quiet hope of a clearer sky, both outside and in their hearts.